Good morning, students. Today we are going to do the last lesson of your class 12 book, Flamingo. The last lesson is written by a French novelist and a short story writer, Alphonse Daudet. The last lesson, children, is set in the days of Franco-Prussian War, in which France was defeated by Prussia. Prussia was basically led by Bismarck. Prussia then consisted of what now are the nations of Germany, Poland, and parts of Austria. In this particular story, the last lesson by Alphonse Daudet, the French districts of Alsace and Lorraine have passed into Russian hands. Now we are going to read the story. Before that, I just mentioned here that France was defeated by Prussia that was led by Bismarck. Now, who was Bismarck? Bismarck, children, was the person who masterminded the unification of Germany in 1871. And if we look at this map, we can see the districts. We can see these districts of Alsace and Lorraine of France. Can you see that in the map? Yes? Yes, you can. Good. So now we are going to start with the story, children. The story is narrated by a boy, a young boy who is going to school. And as we read the story, I'll be reading the story and explaining it simultaneously to all of you. The theme of the story, you must notice and you must be able to analyze on your own what is the theme of this particular story. All right? So this is a schoolboy who's going to narrate the story, and I'm just starting with the first paragraph of the last lesson. I started for school very late that morning and was in great dread of a scolding, especially because Hamel had said that he would question us on participles. Now, obviously, now you can understand who is Hamel. He is the teacher who teaches French. He is the language teacher. And I did not know the first word about them. So, and I did not know the first word about them. Basically, what does it mean? The boy wants to say that he knew nothing about the participles. For a moment, I thought of running away and spending the day out of doors. It was so warm, so bright. The birds were chirping at the edge of the woods. And in the open field back of the sawmill, the Prussian soldiers were drilling. The meaning of sawmill is displayed on this given slide, children. You can just have a look. It is basically a factory in which logs are sawn into planks or boards by machines. The Prussian soldiers were drilling. It was all much more tempting than the rule for participles, but I had the strength to resist and hurried off to school. So, though there was this temptation to stay and see what is going around, well, he didn't do that. He just hurried off to school. When I passed the town hall, there was a crowd in front of the bulletin board. So in the town hall, when he passed the town hall, there was a crowd in front of the bulletin board. For the last 2 years, all our bad news had come from there. The lost battles, the draft, the orders of the commanding officer, and I thought to myself without stopping, what can be the matter now? So since the crowd had gathered over there, he looked at the crowd. He was curious. He wanted to go there near the bulletin board and have a look However, he didn't do that and he just rushed off to school. Then, as I hurried by as fast as I could go, the blacksmith watched her, who was there with his apprentice. Who is an apprentice, children? Apprentice is a person who is learning from a skilled employer. Reading the bulletin, called after me, "Don't go so fast. You'll get to your school in plenty of time." I thought he was making fun of me and reached Hamel's little garden all out of breath. Usually, when school began, there was a great bustle. What is bustle? Bustle means when there is a lot of activity, when you are excited activity and movement, which could be heard out in the street. The opening and closing of desks, lessons repeated in unison, very loud, with our hands over our ears to understand better, and the teacher's great ruler rapping on the table. But now it was all so still. I had counted on the commotion to get to my desk without being seen. But of course, that day everything had to be as quiet as Sunday morning. So basically, he was relying on this regular commotion which he generally sees in his school. But today everything was so still, so quiet. Through the window, I saw my classmates already in their places, and Hamel walking up and down with his terrible iron ruler under his arm. I had to open the door and go in before everybody. You can imagine how I blushed and how frightened I was. But nothing happened. Hamel saw me and said very kindly, "Go to your place quickly, little Franz. We were beginning without you." I jumped over the bench and sat down at my desk. Not till then, when I had got a little over my fright, did I see that our teacher had on his beautiful green coat, his frilled shirt, and the little black silk cap all embroidered that he never wore except on inspection and prize days. Besides, the whole school seemed so strange and solemn. Solemn is something when something is very formal and dignified. So everything seemed so strange and solemn to him. But the thing that surprised me most was to see on the black benches that were always empty the village people sitting quietly like ourselves. So he is surprised because initially his French teacher did not say anything to him when he came late. And now this is the second surprise for him, that he sees that the benches that generally were empty are not. Today they are not empty. The village people were sitting over there. Old Hosse with his three-cornered hat, the former mayor, the former postmaster, and several others besides. Everybody looked sad, and Hosse had brought an old primer. Primer, children, is an elementary textbook. Thumbed at the edges, and he held it open on his knees, with his great spectacles lying across the pages. While I was wondering about it all, Hamel mounted his chair and, in the same grave and gentle tone which he had used to me, said, "My children, this is the last lesson I shall give you. The order has come from Berlin to teach only German in the schools of Alsace and Lorraine. The new master comes tomorrow. This is your last French lesson. I want you to be very attentive." What a thunderclap these words were to me. Oh, the wretches! That was what they had put up at the town hall. So now all of a sudden relate that why the crowd was there near the bulletin board. Now he understood, okay, so this is what was put up on the bulletin board near the at the town hall. My last French lesson. Why, I hardly knew how to write. I should never learn any more. I must stop there then. Oh, how sorry I was for not learning my lessons, for seeking birds' eggs or going sliding on the Saar. Saar is a river, children. Okay, it is a river in West Europe, eastern France. My books that had seemed such a nuisance a while ago, so heavy to carry, my grammar and my history of the saints were old friends now that I couldn't give up. And Hamel too, the idea that he was going away, that I should never see him again, made me forget all about his ruler and how cranky he was. Now, what kind of emotions, what kind of mental dilemma, or should I say, what kind of mixed emotions right now France is going through? Yes, obviously he is not liking this. The moment he must have heard when his teacher told him that this is the last lesson, he would not have loved it. He would not have loved it, and now there is immense amount. There is a lot of regret in his heart that why why he was not attentive when the lessons were going on. Why was he not attentive in his class? Why wasn't he alert, and why didn't he listen to his teacher? So all those feelings are there in his heart right now. Poor man, it was in honor of this last lesson that he had put on his fine Sunday clothes. And now I understood why the old men of the village were sitting there in the back of the room. It was because they were sorry too that they had not gone to school more. It was their way of thanking our master for his 40 years of faithful service and of showing their respect for the country that was theirs no more. So there is this feeling of patriotism in all of them. And since they all know that this is the last lesson of French that is going to be taken up by the teacher, they all have gathered. They all have gathered. This is a mark just to pay a respect to the language, and also this is their way of show nationalism, patriotism. So when they all gather like this in one classroom to attend this last lesson of this particular teacher, while I was thinking of all this, I heard my name called. It was my turn to recite. What would I not have given to be able to say that dreadful rule for the participle all through? Very loud and clear, and without one mistake. But I got mixed up on the first words and stood there, holding on to my desk, my heart beating and not daring to look up. I heard Hamel say to me, I won't scold you, little Franz. You must feel bad enough. See how it is. Every day. So now, you will just see now there is this feeling of regret. Every day we have said to ourselves, bah, I have plenty of time. I learn it tomorrow. And now you see where we have come out. Ah, that's the great trouble with Alsace. When the author says great trouble with Alsace, he's basically referring to the people of Alsace, that they put off learning till tomorrow. So the author says that's the great trouble with Alsace. She puts off learning till tomorrow. Now, those fellows out there will have the right to say to you, how is it you pretend to be Frenchmen and yet you can neither speak nor write your own language? But you are not the worst, poor little Franz. We have all a great deal to reproach ourselves with. Reproaches, children. What is the meaning of reproach? Disappoint. Okay, reproach means disappoint. Now you see the order has come from Berlin to teach only German in the schools. And this is the last French lesson that these children are going to attend. And not just only children, but everyone in the village, all these old men, they have all come to attend this last lesson of French. And M. Hamel goes on to say, he further says, your parents were not anxious enough to have you learn. They preferred to put you to work on a farm or at the mills, so as to have a little more money. And I have been to blame so. I have been to blame also. Have I not often sent you to water my flowers instead of learning your lessons? And when I wanted to go fishing, did I not just give you a holiday? Then, from one thing to another, M. Hamel went on to talk of the French language, saying that it was the most beautiful language in the world, the clearest, the most logical, that we must guard it among us and never forget it, because when a people are enslaved, as long as they hold fast to their language, it is as if they had the key to their prison. Then he opened a grammar and read us our lesson. I was amazed to see how well I understood it. Now, can you guess? Can you guess, children, how well I understood it when this little boy, Franz, says that I was amazed to see how well I understood it? Why all of a sudden he is understanding now? Because, yes, you are right, because this time he was alert, he was all ears, and he was interested. This is what, when you know that this is the last lesson, this is the last time that you are going to do this, you are really interested in it. You put your heart and soul into it. So, France is also doing that right now. Whatever Mr. Hamel said, he understood each and every word of it. Because he was alert, he was interested, and he was finally his heart and soul was into the lesson. All he said seemed so easy, so easy. I think too that I had never listened so carefully, and that he had never explained everything with so much patience. It seemed almost as if the poor man wanted to give us all he knew before going away, and to put it all into our heads at one stroke. So, so this little boy feels that our teacher is obviously, the teacher also knows that this is the last lesson. So the teacher is trying to impart his knowledge to all of us in his last lesson. So he's trying to tell us almost everything. At least he's trying to tell us whatever he knows nicely so that we understand. After the grammar, we had a lesson in writing. That day, M. Hamel had new copies for us, written in a beautiful round hand. France, Alsace, France, Alsace. They looked like little flags floating everywhere in the schoolroom, hung from the rod at the top of our desks. You ought to have seen how everyone set to work and how quiet it was. The only sound was the scratching of the pens over the paper. Once some beetles, children. Once some beetles flew in, but nobody paid any attention to them, not even the littlest ones, who worked right on tracing their fish hooks as if that was French too. On the roof, the pigeons cooed very low, and I thought to myself, will they make them sing in German, even the pigeons? Whenever I looked up from my writing, I saw M. Hamel sitting motionless in his chair and gazing first at one thing, then at another, as if he wanted to fix in his mind just how everything looked in that little schoolroom. So now, when the orders have come from Berlin, what were the orders? The orders were that in all the schools, German will be taught and French will obviously not be taught. Now, when he says, I thought to myself, will they make them sing in German, even the pigeons? So basically, what he's trying to say is here is that language was as natural to them as cooing was to pigeons. So, making any language compulsory dominating, is like dominating the force of nature and enslaving it. Okay, so adopting a new language is painful and it definitely causes discomfort to anyone. In this case, they will have to learn German. Whenever I looked up from my writing, I saw Hamel sitting motionless in his chair and gazing first at one thing, then at another, as if he wanted to fix in his mind just how everything looked in that little schoolroom. So he's watching his teacher. The teacher is sitting motionless in his chair. He's looking here and there. Obviously, he's unhappy, children. Fancy. For 40 years, just imagine that for 40 years he had been there in the same place with his garden outside the window and his class in front of him, just like that. Only the desks and benches had been worn smooth. The walnut trees in the garden were taller, and the hop vine that he had planted himself twined about the windows to the roof. How it must have broken his heart to leave it all, poor man, to hear his sister moving about in the room above, packing their trunks, for they must leave the country the next day. But he had the courage to hear every lesson to the very last. After the writing, we had a lesson in history, and then the babies chanted their ba, be, bee, bo, boo. Down there, at the back of the room, old Hosser had put on his spectacles and holding his primer in both hands, spelled the letters with them. You could see that he too was crying. His voice trembled with emotion, and it was so funny to hear him that we all wanted to laugh and cry. Ah, how well I remember it, that last lesson. All at once, the church clock struck 12. Then the Angelus. Excuse me, children. At the same moment, the trumpets of the Prussians returning from drill sounded under our windows. Hamel stood up, very pale in his chair. I never saw him look so tall. My friends, said he. I, I, but something choked him. He could not go on. Then he turned to the blackboard, took a piece of chalk, and, bearing on with all his might, he wrote as large as he could. Vive la France. Then he stopped and leaned his head against the wall, and without a word he made a gesture to us with his hand. School is dismissed. You may go. That was the end of the explanation of the chapter, The Last Lesson, children, by Alphonse Daudet, the French novelist and short story writer. Now we'll just quickly discuss a few question answers. As you can see on your slide, there are around 6 questions, all right? There are around 6 questions here. So you can just note down these questions, and in the meantime, we can just discuss the value points of these questions. The first one is that you have to write a character sketch of Hamel. Alright, so basically Hamel, children, has been portrayed as a character with many sides to his nature. Alright, I'm going very slow so that you can just jot down the value points. Now, if you'll remember in the beginning of the story, as Franz describes him like a typical schoolmaster. He's very strict and he's a bit cranky too. His students are scared of him. And after the French were defeated by the Germans, M. Hamel shows a totally different side of his nature. So this last lesson of French brings forth a very kind and gentle teacher who is considerate towards his students. So in the beginning, as I told you, he appears to be a typical schoolmaster, very strict and a bit cranky too. However, when he realizes that now the orders have come and French is not going to be taught anymore, we see a different side of him. We see that he's a very kind and a very gentle teacher and who is considerate towards his students. He does not scold Franz for coming late. Rather, he acts politely by mentioning that it was good that he has come because they were going to start the lesson without him. So, and later on, further, when Franz fails to recite the rules of participles, he did not scold him also. If we talk of his patriotism, if we talk of nationalism, if we talk of patriotism, children, M. Hamel was a true patriot at heart. He calls the French language the most beautiful, the most logical, and the clearest language in the world. And when he talks like this, when you talk of your language like this, your true nationalism, your true patriotism is reflected in your personality. He advises the people to guard their language. He is extremely emotional when the time comes to bid goodbye. He is unable to utter a word. He gets choked but still gathers courage, and finally he even writes on the board, Vive la France, that is, long live France. Okay, so in this character sketch of M. Hamel, have you understood what all are you going to write? I'll just recapitulate quickly for you. In the beginning of the story, he appears to be a typical schoolmaster, very strict and a bit cranky too. His students were scared of him. After the French were defeated by the Germans, M. Hamel shows a totally different side of his nature. And in the last lesson of French, a very different personality is portrayed. He is a very kind and gentle teacher who is considerate towards his students. He does not scold Franz for coming late. Rather, he acts politely by mentioning that it was good that he has come because they were going to start the lesson without him. Further, when Franz fails to recite the rules of participles, he did not scold him. Hamel is a true patriot at heart. He calls the French language the most beautiful, the most logical, and the clearest language in the world. He advises the people to guard their language. He is extremely emotional, and when the time comes to bid goodbye, he is unable to utter a word. He gets choked, but still gathers courage to write on the board, Vive la France, which means long live France. Alright, let's come to the next question. Describe the change in the attitude of Franz towards his language and his teacher. Alright. Now, initially, if you remember when the story starts, Franz is hesitant to go to school. He has never shown sincerity towards his studies. He does not like his teacher and he is scared of him because he has asked him to learn participles, which he of course failed to learn. So basically, according to Franz, he has formed an image of M. Hamel as a teacher who is very strict and cranky. The day the French were defeated by the German, he finds a dramatic change in the behavior of his teacher, who had spoken to him very politely when he got late for school. So when he comes late, if you remember the lesson, when he enters the classroom very late, M. Hamel does not scold him. So this is a change in his behavior which is noticed by him. As soon as Franz learns about the fact that it was their last French lesson, he starts to regret for not paying attention to his lessons of French. So now all of a sudden, when he knows that this is the last lesson today, then he realizes that, and then he regrets for not paying attention to his French lessons. So far, he was ignorant about his mother tongue. The books that were nuisance to him till today, till now, the books that were nuisance to him seem to be very important possessions all of a sudden. The thought of not seeing Mr. M. Hamel anymore and the realization of German becoming the official language changes the attitude of little Franz towards his language teacher. Okay, so in this particular question, that is, describe the change in the attitude of Franz towards the language and his teacher. This is what you can write. These were the value points. I'll just quickly recapitulate this for you. Franz is hesitant initially to go to school. This you know that, right? As the story starts, he is hesitant to go to school, and later on, when he does not like his French teacher. Also, he's scared of him because he failed to learn his rules of participles. He forms an image of M. Hamel as a teacher who was very strict and cranky. The day the French were defeated by the Germans, he finds a dramatic change in the behavior of his teacher M. Hamel, who had spoken to him very politely when he had got late for school. As soon as Franz learns about the fact that it was their last French lesson, he starts to regret for not paying attention to his French lessons. He was ignorant about his mother tongue. The books that were nuisance to him till now seemed to be the most important possessions. The thought of not seeing Mr. Hamel anymore and the realization of German becoming the official language changes the attitude of little Franz towards his language and his teacher. Alright, let's come to the next question. Explain. M. Hamel was symbolic of patience that day, a true patriot. M. Hamel showed a lot of patience that day. Okay, this little boy in his narration, while narrating the story, says that M. Hamel showed a lot of patience that day. He did not scold Franz for getting late, rather he spoke politely to him. He also refrained from scolding Franz when he fails to recite the rules of the participles. He tried to justify the reason behind the people being ignorant about their mother tongue. In this case, the French language. In fact, he went a step ahead and blamed himself for not doing his duty as a teacher. He accepted that he sent the students for less important things like watering the plants or giving them a holiday instead of helping them out to learn. He was a children's true patriot, and it is visible through his appreciation of French language, how he appreciates his language. He mentions that French is the most beautiful, logical, and clearest language, and the French people should hold fast to their language and not let it go. So this is how we can say that he was a true patriot. On the day he was leaving, everyone was overwhelmed with emotion, but he maintained patience and listened to each one recite his or her lesson. Finally, at the end, although very weak at heart, he wrote on the blackboard "Vive la France," which means that he was a true patriot. If we start with the next question is, why did M. Hamel not scold Franz for not learning his lessons? Well, he did not scold him for not learning his lessons because he was aware of the fact that it was too late to do anything about it. It was M. Hamel's last day at school. He was delivering the last lesson. The students were also aware of the reality Each heart was full of sorrow. It was a very emotional moment. Hamel was not in his usual self. He, the teacher, and the taught were all were quite moved by the fact that it was their last French lesson. Everyone, everyone who was present there would not be there the next day to learn their own language. They all knew this. So these conditions, made him very emotional, extremely soft at heart, and therefore he refrained from scolding France that day. Coming to the next question, children. Excuse me. Explain the importance of the parting message on the day of the last lesson. Give some examples from the text to support the answer or your explanation. Now, the day of the last lesson, children, was full of regret. Everybody was regretting. The teacher was also regretting. Franz was also regretting. Old, old people, old villagers, they were also regretting. All the people sitting in the room, whether the teacher, the students, or the village elders, all of them were extremely sad. The people of France were shocked by the new order which had come from Berlin. Their patriotic feeling for their language was overflowing. In such an environment, the teacher announced that he was going to deliver his last French lesson. This is why probably he stresses upon neglected French language and states it to be the most beautiful, logical, and clearest language. He parted with the message that one should respect and protect his or her mother tongue because it is the only key to one's freedom. His words had a deep impact on his students. He ended his class by writing the words Vive la France, which reflected his patriotism, love, and respect for their mother tongue. Coming to the last question. France thinks, will they make them sing in German, even the pigeons? What could this mean? Okay, so you have just read that France had lost two of its districts. Which are those districts? Alsace and Lorraine, okay, to Germany. The Germans had passed an order that only German will be taught in the schools. So this obviously was children very humiliating for the people of France. It had filled French people's heart with patriotism. This last lesson was being taken by M. Hamel and all these students along with the elders. And all these students along with the elders decided that they will attend this last French class in order to learn everything that they perhaps were not able to learn so far. So little Franz was the part of the class. Suddenly he notices the pigeons cooing on the roof in a low tone. Hearing them and after looking at them, he asks himself whether the Germans will make the pigeons also sing in German. Now this seems to be a Frenchman's typical reaction due to the forceful implementation of learning German. This also reflects, children, that man by nature has a tendency to dominate others. The Germans, in this case, could go to any extent in order to establish their dominance. Okay, so in order to establish their dominance, they made German mandatory. They made it compulsory and it will be taught, and only German will be taught in all these schools. In all the schools of these two districts in France which they have occupied. Okay, so we will be giving you some more questions later on. For now, we are going to end this discussion here itself. I hope you understood. I hope all of you had your books. Just in case anyone was unable to grab a hard copy, children, you can also go online and download the NCERT books. Alright, that will help you in studying better. Thank you. That was Sandhya Mudgal. Thank you. Have a good day, all of you.